Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Here we are. Another
Just a normal conversation in front of 100 people. How are you really doing, Dave?
I'm smiling on the outside, and that's all that counts.
Tears of a clown.
Tears of a clown. Here we are at the 2019 Mockingbird Conference. We're doing this in front of an audience, recording our second Mockingcast episode in a row without the fifth wheel known as RJ Heyman. And one of the great things, we were talking to RJ before we recorded this, and he said, we don't feel comfortable making fun of Aaron in the same way. Sarah and I both said this. We don't feel comfortable making fun of you,
Because you
Aaron.
respect me or pity me?
Well,
It's a fine line.
It's a mix.
it's a mix. But anyway, I'm going to do everything I can to belittle you.
Please do.
RJ style.
It's your love language.
Heyman style. Little inside baseball there. But I'm so glad to be here with the two of you.
This is very awkward.
How are you doing? Sarah?
Great. Caught an early flight this morning. I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
That's it?
Good, yeah.
You have got history in New York. Do you want to,
I mean, is that what we're doing?
That you can talk about.
Yeah, that I could. Yeah, no, we used to live in New York. So, newly married, moved up here, lived here for a couple of years. So I love to be back, and I love to be at Calvary St. George's because it's like my church away from church. So, yeah.
enjoy your forgiveness. Hashtag
Exactly.
enjoy your forgiveness.
Exactly.
How about you, Aaron?
I'm doing really well. I don't know if you guys know this. We're recording this right now at the place where 30 Rock filmed the Episcopalian cryogenic freezing service.
They did?
Yeah. So Alec Baldwin held a Episcopal cryogenic freezing service open to all black belt, Six Sigma and higher. And Tracy Morgan goes, "That's the craziest thing I ever heard. Episcopal." And then they filmed it right here, and there was like Don Geist, the fictional head of NBC, frozen like Han Solo in carbonite, right here where we are sitting at this moment. So I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about New York. I saw a 3,500-year-old obelisk in Central Park today that we borrowed from Egypt.
Is that a fact?
It's a fact.
You
right?
went out and saw
I
stuff
did things.
I watched Dr. Phil.
Do you remember
'cause there
Elf?
was a whole
Like
episode
Buddy in
about
New York?
first
That was
cousins
me.
getting married,
Yeah.
and that's what I did this afternoon.
It's edifying.
It was.
Yeah.
It's
Anyways.
impressive.
What also gets filmed here? Though
Tell
it's
me.
been canceled now. Daredevil has been filmed in this space. Damages.
Holy ground, people, take your shoes off.
Yes, watch out. Things could happen. Well, let's dig into our content for this week, or these couple weeks. And the first thing we're going to talk about is this came from the Atlantic Monthly. One of their technology reporters, a young woman named Taylor Lorenz, wrote that the Instagram aesthetic is over.
Praise God, none too soon.
Well, here's what she says. She says, every trend has a shelf life. And as quickly as Instagram ushered in pink walls and pastel macaroons, it's now turning on them. Anything that feels staged is undesirable for today's cohort, or is as undesirable for today's cohort as unfiltered or unflattering photos would be for older influencers. For my generation, influencer Reese Blutstein says, people are more willing to be who they are and not make up a fake identity. We are trying to show a real person doing cool things as a real person, not trying to create a persona that isn't actually you. Then she says that there's a growing number of accounts dedicated to calling out the various cosmetic procedures that celebrities and influencers have had. And influencers themselves have been actively speaking out about burnout, mental health, and the stress that comes with maintaining perfection.
Hashtag seculosity.
Hashtag seculosity. Everyone is trying to be more authentic, says Lexi Carboni, a content marketer at Later. People are writing longer captions. They're sharing how much money they make. I think it all goes back to you don't want to see a girl standing in front of a wall that you've seen thousands of times. We need something new. According to Taylor Cohen, a digital strategist at the advertising agency DDB, the Instagram's aesthetic saturation point came sometime in mid-2018. It's not the same as it was even a year ago, she says. Consider, for example, The Happy Place, an Instagram museum that opened to great fanfare in Los Angeles in 2017 and bills itself as the most Instagrammable pop-up in America. When it opened, people were thrilled to fork over the nearly $30 admission price, but when it arrived in Boston this past month, it landed with a thud. In the beginning, you, quote, had to everyone posting these normal photos so that rainbow-colored food stood out. But because so many people adopted that aesthetic, that has become passé. We're living in influencer overload. Plus, all that perfection is a grind.
Ugh. Yeah, there's a woman in the article who's an influencer, and her whole thing is taking pictures of herself, or actually probably having her team take pictures of her in front of very colorful walls. And she said she got to a place where it was like another day, another wall. And I was like, I can totally relate to that. No, but it sounded exhausting and boring and, the grind of perfection. And my take on this article was, though, I think it's going to become another... I mean, the law just begets more law, and it's trying to find grace. It's trying to find a little escape from the demand of perfection. But then the question will be, how authentic are you? How real are you? Are you being authentically authentic? I mean, there probably will be people who stage like messy living rooms and then take an Instagram photo in front of that to look more authentic. Or so. I mean, I'm not sure that's happened yet, but I bet it will. You know.
I mean, I've done that. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
You like pour out the bag of chips on the couch.
Yeah. I'm like, look how messy we are.
We're real people.
We're real people. I mean, I love Instagram. I post on it all the time, but
I wasn't aware.
Yeah, but I also like, I'm like, how does this all end? Like, where does this land? Like, if we're asking for people to be more and more authentic, like, first of all, please don't be too authentic. But what is that? Like, where does that end up? You know what I mean? But I actually was thinking also about a woman I know who I wrote about. I'm trying to remember her name, who lost her daughter pretty tragically at 3. And she wrote about, like, her hashtag was like mom grief, I think. And this has been several years ago. And I've kind of watched this whole community of women who lost children really young kind of gather around each other. And I think there's some major need for that community for them. And there's major authenticity there. So I don't know how authentic we can be if we're still trying to be authentic. I don't know, right?
Authenticity, it's funny, it kind of dates Mockingbird because we've been around long enough that I remember in 2010 and 2011 when authenticity was a huge buzzword.
That's the word, yeah.
And there was a book written called The Authenticity Hoax, which was said exactly, authenticity is like humility. The more you try to be authentic, the less authentic you are. You cannot be approached directly. It's actually a bit like happiness in that respect. And so you have all these people trying to be authentic, which by definition means you're not actually being authentic because you're self-conscious and it's performative. It's just performative in a different way. And yet I still prefer the way that some of these younger influencers talk and the way that they surface the enormous burden, the mental health burden of this curated perfection or even curated messiness that we've talked about before. I'm glad that is becoming more and more unavoidable in any discussion of social media, no matter what you do. I remember the guy who runs the star of that show High Maintenance on HBO, which I've never seen. Just kidding. It's a great show. And
I haven't seen that.
He quit. He did this whole thing about
you're being
quitting
authentic.
Instagram.
I don't know.
And he basically said we all know deep down that this is like kind of destroying us. So I'm just going to quit it, and I'm not going to come back and check on you guys. And I know it's ironic to announce on social media that I'm quitting Instagram, but I'm doing it. So I don't know. I also read like a couple weeks ago that Instagram was thinking very seriously about taking away the like button, or like no one could see how many likes. Only you could see how many likes a photo had gotten. And I wonder, would that change things? I mean, maybe there is some kind of reckoning coming.
I mean, that's the thing about this article. They talk about. I think it was this article that talked about traditional influencers. And by the way, traditional, we mean they've been around for like 5 months. But because this all changes so fast. But traditional influencers are beginning to see followers drop off. And so there's this push to be more authentic because no one wants to see the old, boring, perfect aesthetic. They want to see something authentic and messy. And what's under all that, though, is that it's still, as you point out, about getting likes and about getting follows. And so we may change what the standard is, but it's still, like, make no mistake, it's still about getting people to like you. It's still about getting approval. It's still about it's still functioning as a law. We may be grading different things, but we're still grading you, and people are still. I mean, what's the point of being an influencer if you've only got 10 followers, right? You need to have thousands, and you got to give the people what they want. So I think, yeah, I mean, it just seems like a grind. It'll be interesting what the next iteration will be.
Yeah, because there will be another iteration.
I do wonder though if it's like also the platform, just because Instagram, in a way that like I feel like Facebook tries to but can't, and then Twitter is so word centric that it demands more of us. Like it demands image and it demands words, and it's demanding more words. And I think they said in this article, people are starting to write more along with the images. And so I just wonder if it's pulling more out of us for good or for ill, right? It demands more of us just if we're going to create on there.
And so everything is moving towards stories. Do you guys know this? Like even Twitter is experimenting with stories because it makes people feel like it's a more one-on-one connection. When you watch the little, essentially tiny movie about somebody's day, it makes you feel like you're connected to them or something. But stories, I can't get into it. One, I'm too old, and I'm 40 years old, and I finally feel like I'm that guy that's like, what? I'm like, like my mom, who like still signs her text messages to me.
She also likes every single thing.
She likes every
Facebook,
single,
which is my favorite.
I wake up,
thing.
32 notifications. My mom has been on my church's
amazing.
Facebook page. Yeah. So
She likes some of my stuff too.
Shout out to Lucia. So yeah. But it's like a lot of work to do these stories. Like you have to put quotes, there's different colors, there's font choices, there's stickers, there's all kinds of things. And I don't have time for that. It's getting like I'm protesting, I'm boycotting that. But everything is moving in that direction.
But stories are less mediated a little bit. It feels that way.
Exactly.
Don't you think? Mm-hmm. Because one of the things it says in here is that people, they feel like their actual single photo post, that's like a major statement. There's something, because it fades away.
Yeah.
There's a time limit on it. It's a little Snapchatty, that there's less pressure.
Yeah.
And so naturally people are trying to find a way to receive love and affirmation and connect with other people, but that requires the minimum amount of pressure, basically. And I think that's so therefore they move to stories. But then I don't know about you, I get overloaded with stories.
Do you guys know what we're saying when we say stories? I feel like that's like the thing.
It's at the top.
Some people are saying yes, some people, it's at the top of Instagram. And it's like you can do these little snippets and they move pretty quickly. It's
like little video clips that you take of your life. Or
you should take a story of this right now.
Anyways, put a story.
What we're really
Everyone
saying.
will watch it. Yeah.
Well, we'll go from something that not everyone knows about to something that everyone knows about. Let's talk about death. The funeral as we know it is becoming a relic just in time for a death boom. This is in the Washington Post by Karen Heller and brought to our attention by Jared Jones. And it is this, it works with this Instagram article because it kind of describes as the Instagram itself is moving away from curated, beautiful, fluorescent colors. It sounds like the death industry is moving into that space.
Yeah.
This is what she writes. She says, an increasingly secular, nomadic, and casual America is shredding the rules about how to commemorate death. And it's not just among the wealthy and famous. Somber, embalmed body funerals are, for many families, a relic. Instead, end-of-life ceremonies are being personalized. Golf course cocktail send-offs, backyard potluck memorials, more Sinatra and Clapton, less Ave Maria, more Hawaiian shirts, fewer dark suits. Families want to, I can't believe she wrote this, but I understand it was irresistible. Families want to put the fun in funerals. The movement will only accelerate as the nation approaches an historic spike in deaths, by which they mean the baby boomers are all...
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then here you go. More than half of all American deaths lead to cremations today, compared to 28% in 2002, due to expense, the environment, and family members living far apart. And by 2035, the cremation rate is projected to be a staggering 80%.
Yeah.
Cremation, of course, frees loved ones to stage a memorial anywhere at any time and to store or scatter ashes as they please. They quote a few of the folks involved in this industry, say, services are more life-centered around the person's personality, likes, and dislikes. They're unique and not standardized. Funeral homes have hired event planners, remodeled drab parlors to include dance floors and lounge areas, acquired liquor licenses to replace the traditional vat of industrial-strength coffee. There are death doulas, death cafes, death celebrants.
No. Okay.
Living funerals, which is attended by the honored while still breathing, and end-of-life workshops for the healthy who think ahead. Captain Ken Middleton's Hawaii ash scatterings performs 600 cremains dispersals a year for as many as 80 passengers on cruises that may feature a ukulele player, a conch shell blower, and releases of white doves or monarch butterflies. It makes it a celebration of life and not such a morbid affair, says Middleton. And then she goes for another irresistible pun. She says that the death industry is literally thinking outside the box. Then they sort of, in sum, Karen says that, Ms. Heller says that anything other than denial that you're going to die seems to be a healthy step in our culture. And yet there's something called a death-positive movement. Some practitioners worry that death has taken a holiday and that grief is too frequently banished in end-of-life celebrations that seem like birthday blowouts. Do you think we're getting too happy with this? Asked Amy Cunningham, director of the Inspired Funeral in Brooklyn. You can't pay tribute to someone who has died without acknowledging the death and sadness around it. You still have to dip into reality and not ignore the fact that they're absent now. And yet in some services, instead of offering hollow platitudes that barely relate to the deceased, we are getting a new radical honesty where people are openly talking about alcoholism, drug use, and the tough times the person experienced. Suicide, long hidden, appears more and more in obituaries. Opioid addiction, especially, is addressed in services.
So I think what we see happening is you name in your book, Dave, the fact that we're not less religious. We're just doing it in different places and in different ways. And I think this trend of the funeral planner, that they talk in this article about Jerry Seinfeld's manager and his funeral, and they hired a woman in LA who her job is celebration of life planner. And so that to me names a true thing, that people actually need someone to help them walk through what you do when someone dies. And there have long been highly trained professionals like Sarah and myself who will do this for you for free.
For free.
But people don't go to church anymore, so they have to find a secular version to fill that gap. So I think it names a thing. It's good to have somebody who knows what they're doing help walk you through a death. But I dare say probably every clergy person in this room has faced the trend of people wanting celebrations of life and not funerals, because I don't know why. It's so because people don't like death, and but I think, and back me up here, Sarah, I think people do themselves a disservice because you never actually get to name the hard thing. You don't. It kind of shortcuts grief or something.
I think this whole thing is so selfish. I think that's what I struggle with this piece. I mean, just to name it, it's real selfish. I mean, yes, I do. You know, church now is a thing to navigate with funerals, especially with people who don't come to church at all. You know, their great aunt apparently went to church, and so they show up and they want you to do her funeral, but they only want John Lennon songs and they want like clowns, you know? And so you've got to be like, no, we can't. Like our organist actually can't play John Lennon, and like clowns are scary for everyone. And, but it becomes like so the manager's funeral that was described, I felt really sad about that because I thought, gosh, because it was her father's funeral. And I thought, if this was my dad's funeral and we had all his favorite things there and we were in his favorite place and we had his favorite music, it would just make me even sadder that he wasn't there, I think. I think that would be, and I wouldn't really have a way to process it because I wouldn't be in like a religious context. I also think that we plan funerals right now for ourselves when we should be planning them for the people that are left. Like my husband and I talk a lot about like if we died now, well, we have these really high notions, right? If we died 30 years from now, we would be cremated and blah, 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 blah. But like if we died right now, I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they need a place to come and visit their mama. Mm-hmm. So like, and we're not going to say, oh, and mama was cremated. Don't worry about what that is. You're 4. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to do a coffin. Like, we would spend the ghastly amount of money because that's what the people would need at that point when I died. And certainly they would need, the comfort of Jesus. So I really, this whole thing is like such a nightmare to me. And I hate, we do funerals. I don't know how many you do, but I certainly have done quite a few in funeral homes. Ugh. And that's like the worst. And I've said this before in talks, but I always want to say to people, we used to, and I know no one wants to set up your grandmama in the front room of your house when she's dead, but we used to do that. We'd set up people in the parlor, right? That's the room. And then the Civil War happened and we realized we could embalm bodies. Y'all didn't know you were getting a history lesson. We could embalm bodies and we could send them around the country. And these guys who were doing the embalming said, hey, we can make money off of this. And they started funeral parlors, and that front room of your house became your living room because you didn't have dead people in there anymore, so you could call it that. So, for me, funerals are like I would actually rather somebody have them in a movie theater sometimes than in those spaces. But sorry, I have strong opinions about that.
It's so interesting. I have like 2 or 3 different opinions because I know people who are grieving, you do want to remember your family member, and well, who is against that? That's a wonderful thing to have a time to process together and those things. And yet to move from that to a death positive movement. As a Christian, I think that death is a judgment. I think death is actually sort of the wages of sin. And that Jared Jones wrote about this on Facebook. He says, we don't do celebrations of life. We do services of death and resurrection.
That's right.
We do not gather together to celebrate a life. We gather together to worship the one who defeated death and proclaim the promises of God over the deceased. And I'm also always, when I hear about death positivity, as it's just another part of life, and we should make it as happy, as many Hawaiian shirts as possible. You think about, well, how could you do that if it's a child that dies?
Right.
And then I also think about the Onion article, the great rejoinder to the Lion King, the headline, "Dying lion sure doesn't feel as though he's completing some great cosmic circle."
Yeah.
That's where I am with it. And then also David Brooks has come out with this new book, The Second Mountain, this week, that's been all over the place because it's really recounting his conversion to something like Christianity. And he wrote this article called 5 Lies the Culture Tells Us. And one of the things he says is that we've just sort of imbibed this sort of hyper-individualized view of life that is expressed in this hyper-individualized unique, everything's got to be completely, curated to the person's exact personality. And that's an enormous burden to put on the people who are just shocked by sadness.
Yeah, who are super sad.
And it's also an enormous burden for a person to have to come up with their own theory and ritual around death when they've never thought about it, or they're just too shell-shocked.
Right. And so here's the good thing. By the way, Paul Zoll, your dad, in his book, Peasy's Panopticon, looks at all the different ways people approach death. And the conclusion, buy the book, read it. But at the end, he says, when you die, be an Episcopalian. And the burial service begins on page, whatever it is, the prayer book, right one. And he's sort of right, and because it has never been bettered. It's been thought through by people who know what they're talking about. And the beautiful thing about a funeral service, a real funeral service, is that it's going to be scriptural, not stuff you made up. And it's going to be the same for everybody. Because the thing about the celebration of life, as Sarah said, it's selfish. It sort of makes up this thing that each person's, when you die, you need to have something as bespoke as weddings have become. Like it's this whole culture of now, my parents did not have a gender reveal party.
Right.
Like this is a new thing. Nobody did this 10 years ago.
You got here and they just like dealt with it.
Yeah. I had no professional photographs taken of me ever until my wedding. And now it's like, will you be my first date photographer?
Right,
and then we
right.
need, yeah. So anyways, so we, it's part of this, I mean, it's related to the Instagrammability of life. But the thing about a funeral is my funeral will be the same as Sarah's funeral, will be the same as Dave's funeral. Maybe the hymns will be a little bit different. But it kind of gets at this fact, it's this democracy of death. Nobody's different here. We all die. And it gives, I think about the grandkids of this guy that had the big blowout celebration of life party. And like basically that whole message where we have like granddad, quote, baseball hats and his favorite hot dogs, and Jerry Seinfeld closes with the, comedy routine about the guy. Like for his grandkids, they don't have the sophistication to sort of maybe be I grieve in private, but this is the way we celebrate his life publicly. They're just sad. And that whole ceremony, assuming there's no other ceremony, just says like, don't be sad. And also don't ask questions about how God fits into all this. And so, yeah, do a service in a church, have a real funeral.
Well, when it also becomes a celebration of life, there's a little bit of you cannot hide the performancism aspect of like listing their accomplishments.
Right.
And what happens if you have a person who just led a sort of a mediocre life and they lived in fear and kind of just got through it.
Yeah.
And didn't have that many loved ones.
Right.
The offensive thing about the Christian gospel is that the hope for them is the same as the person who has got the blowout with 300 people in Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah.
Can I tell you the most healing line of the Episcopal funeral service?
Sure.
Do I have a
It's
choice?
at the commendation. I mean, I think this is the most beautiful sentence of the whole thing. And our bishop actually begins his sermons with this prayer. Behold, O Lord, a lamb of your own flock, a sheep of your own fold, and a sinner of your own redeeming. Like the priest says that next to the casket where an actual dead person is, again, getting this idea that we die and are raised. It's not able, as Weber likes to say, we are dirt and breath, God's breath and dirt, and we will go back to dust and will be raised to new life from that. And so it's very, very earthy and real, and you say with your hand outstretched, this is a sinner of your own redeeming. There's no kind of whitewashing the person's life. You've said it all right there. This is a sinner and someone who's been redeemed by you. So it's not like, because the worst thing is a celebration of life that just says the good things and doesn't mention any of the horrible stuff that everybody in the front row, like all the family members are thinking, and they know that this service is kind of BS.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, I keep thinking, so I had a relative die about a month ago in rural Louisiana, and she was mean as a snake. I mean, mean. Her only redeeming quality for me was that she loved QVC jewelry, and I've gotten a lot of it. But I remember thinking around the death, and I wasn't able to go. I had the kids, and my husband was traveling, but my mom went, and it was like, my mom was like, "What am?" And so both sides of my family are like hard shell, rural Baptist kind of stuff. So people just get up and say stuff. And I was like, do you think anybody's going to say anything mean about Aunt Augustine? And my mom was like, of course not. And nobody did. I mean, because I think the overwhelming message of that funeral and of all those funerals is the love of God, no matter what, and there's rest to be found there. And even when she died, and I remember, I was like, oh my God, I bet the world's going to feel a little gentler. There was also, truly, there was also an element of she can rest from her meanness in the middle of this ritual, right?
Right.
There's relief for her there too. So,
Wow. Well, that leads in
have funerals, people. Have a funeral, a real one.
I feel like we've been very heavy-handed with this one.
Very heavy-handed.
You do you, but have a funeral.
Yeah.
We have over the last couple of years, we've highlighted a number of those obituaries that are painfully honest.
Yes.
They're so funny, basically, and so out of the common. Anyway,
there is a way you can talk about those as a preacher in a funeral sermon delicately, and as a professional, by the way. Don't do eulogies because it will go off the rails. But if a preacher can talk about the gospel,
unless you're in a small Baptist church in Louisiana,
then just no holds barred.
definitely
Just
do
do whatever.
eulogies.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
no, the single worst moment in the church where I serve, the 10 years I've been there, was one time when someone got up there and held us all hostage with a 70-minute eulogy. It was like a best friend who wanted to talk about this guy's like how great he was with women, and it was like super awkward.
David.
Like the whole town was traumatized. It felt like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. And afterwards, my rector just turned to me. He's like, "This is never happening again, ever.
Yeah.
This is the worst." Because what can you do?
Yeah.
I'm gonna body slam the guy in the middle of it.
That is what you do.
Get the organist to start playing the next
70
hymn.
minutes?
Yeah.
Watching him watch the guy do it was one of the more entertaining things I've ever seen in my life. But from death to life, let's talk about Garrison Keiser.
Easter season.
Sarah, I always associate him with you.
Yeah.
And you sent us this piece
For
about...
good or ill. I
don't
love
know
Garrison
why that is,
Keiser. I
but
know.
yeah.
Well,
We can't talk about Easter this week. And he wrote something. He said, "What happened in church on Sunday, I think." This is what he wrote. He said, "Church was packed on Easter morning. Brass players up in the choir loft, ladies with big hats, girls in spring dresses. And when the choir and clergy processed up the aisle, the woman swinging the censer looked like a drum major leading the team to victory, which is what Easter is about, the triumph over death. Resurrection is not something we Christians talk about in the same way we talk about our plans for summer vacation or retirement. But it is proclaimed on Easter, and the hymns are quite confident with added brass. And the rector seemed to believe in it herself, and so an old writer sitting halfway back and surrounded by good singers has to think along those lines. It's right there in the Nicene Creed and in Luke's Gospel. The women come to the tomb and find the stone rolled away, and the mysterious strangers say, 'Why seek ye the living among the dead?' And then on my way back from communion, the choir struck up a hymn, 'I am the bread of life,' with a rocking chorus, and I will raise them up, and I will raise them up, and I will raise them up on the last day." As the congregation sang, a few people stood, and some raised their hands in the air, a charismatic touch unusual among Anglicans. And then more people stood. I stood. I raised my right hand. I imagined my long-gone parents and brother and grandson and aunts and uncles rising from the dead and coming into radiant glory. And then I was weeping, and my mouth got rubbery, and I couldn't form the consonants. I stayed for the benediction, slipped out a side door onto Amsterdam Avenue, and headed home. That's what I go to church for, to be surprised by faith and to fall apart. Without the resurrection, Episcopalians would just be a wonderful club of very nice people with excellent taste in music and literature.
Thank you.
But when it hits you, what you've actually subscribed to, it blows the top of your head off.
I love Garrison Keiser so much, which I know in our current era of Me Too is a complicated thing for everyone, for me too. Whoops. But I have to say, I've always loved his writing. I was raised on Garrison Keiser. I literally wanted to name one of my children Keiser, but my husband stood in the way of that. Like, that's how great my love is. But I feel like his writing, since he has sinned and suffered for it, has become more beautiful and more honest. And, he had I don't know how much people know about him, but Garrison Keiser was raised in a very stringent, pretty scary Christian household and sort of has come to the Episcopal Church, but sort of half-heartedly. But it seems like since sort of his very public falling out, he writes about the church in a way that I can't read it without weeping. I feel like he understands church now and the need for it now. And the fact that he's like sharing it with the general public is pretty incredible to me. So that's why I sent you this piece. I loved it.
I'd like to compete with Sarah about who loves Garrison Keiser more.
I will win this.
You might, but some of my most...
Are you related?
I've always been kind of lukewarm.
Like childhood memories for me, backseat of my dad's car, listening to Prairie Home Companion.
Yes.
Like Garrison Keiser's voice makes me feel safe and at home. And it's wonderful.
Yeah, we're tracking.
My dad made us listen to very different things.
Well, there was also Beatles and Mozart. So that was the lame childhood that I had.
Okay.
But
praise
the
God.
Beatles weren't lame. Anyways, not about me. The thing that is really wonderful about this is he talks about what church is actually for. which is to make you fall apart, to make you feel understood, to make you feel seen, and having been seen, to make you feel loved, like touched by a divine grace that you don't deserve. And so any church that thinks it's about something else, like, please read what Garrison says here. It's the idea that he can no longer form the consonants in the hymns. That means the gospel is being preached and felt by a man who clearly really needs it. And that's what I thought was so beautiful about this piece. And I think so many churches think that they are about other things. But what was really beautiful was this thing. And it doesn't sound like it was a heavy... I've heard sermons that are like, let me give you the 10 reasons why the resurrection is true, like kind of an apologetic sermon. And that's not I don't think those land usually. I think just preaching as if the resurrection is actually true and what you believe. And it sounds like that's what happened. And he just was struck by it as someone who needs a resurrection. There's a song by the Hold Steady.
What a resurrection really feels like.
It describes a girl who stumbles into mass, her hair full of broken glass, and she tells the priest, let me tell you how a resurrection really feels. And Garrison Keiser is somebody who's, I think, like that. He's come in a place of real brokenness, and he's open to hearing this message. Christianity is about death and resurrection. It's not climbing ladders and getting better.
And the church has welcomed him, because I remember we read one of his pieces on the podcast when he went back to church.
Yeah.
And I knew what church it was. It's in Manhattan. And I was immediately nervous for him that they would find out who he was and that he wouldn't be welcomed there. So it's like such a huge gift to me to know that, like, and it's the same church. I mean, I know what church he's at. It's like that he's continuing. He's found a home
It's
there.
Hillsong, isn't it?
It's not Hillsong.
Ooh.
You might think that, but they don't let girls be in charge there. So. Ooh.
Well then, let me think. If I were RJ sitting here,
Yeah.
I would probably
You would
say what he
sing that
said last
song.
time. He said remember what he said? He was like, last time we talked about Garrison Keiser, Mr. Party Pooper Heyman.
What did he say?
Said, well, that's all great, but why does he feel the need to sort of be publicly, sort of
he did say that.
perform it for us? And I think, like I always think, to hell with you, RJ.
Yes.
Like,
And the
That's
horse
a
you
wrap.
rode in on.
Yeah.
this is a beautiful moment. And in a week when I read something in the New York Times by some mainline Protestant person talking about how the resurrection, the bodily resurrection is, who cares, or sort of why Christians get obsessed with that. And you're thinking like, well, this is the power. There's power in the blood. This is he's thinking about seeing his loved ones again. He's thinking about death itself being trampled down, not metaphorically, as true as that. It doesn't not work as a metaphor.
Yeah.
It doesn't not work in all sorts of other narrative forms, but we're talking about a real thing.
And can I say the power of music in this as well is just another real key thing. I remember Leander Harding in seminary would say more people are converted through hymns than sermons, and there's probably something to that. I mean, Garrison Keiser would never, and many people would never find themselves just at a cocktail party saying, and God will raise them up on the last day. Like, that's not a thing we say. But when you put it to music, we do this thing where we all then, we sort of say, if we sing it, it's okay. And so you start expressing this thing with your body, and somehow it connects to your heart, and you're just now a puddle in the pew, because you are thinking about how, if you get past your hyper-rational, intelligent, enlightenment brain, and you start thinking about your brother and your grandparents and your mom and all those people, and you start saying and singing, I will raise them up at the last day, now you've connected with that deep desire to have death not be the end. I mean, we're made to go back and be with God. And so the music has allowed him to do that. And that's another thing why, for example, tying it back to the funeral talk before, you don't want to be singing My Way.
Right.
At the funeral.
Right.
People request it all the time. I have a policy at St. Albans Waco, and I've preached from the
They
pulpit.
request that song?
Oh my gosh.
Do you tell them, like, okay, if you change the lyrics to I did it my way and I'm probably going to hell for it, then you can sing it?
Then you can sing it. No, I don't. Maybe I should. But
People love hell jokes.
yeah. It's a pastoral winner, I find. Yes, and I think, but music, that's another reason Garrison. So the thing about, why does Garrison Keiser, to RJ's thing about why does he have to kind of be public about this? Let's not forget, like, he's writing this on some little website he had to start for himself.
Yes.
after his whole professional life
wiped
was
from the internet.
annihilated.
Yeah.
I know. RJ really needs to
Seriously,
stop
what a
thinking that way.
judgmental RJ. Where does he get off?
Yeah, RJ
criticizing?
Heyman, if you're
Unbelievable.
listening.
That guy's
When you
so
when
full
you
of
were like,
himself.
what would RJ say right now? I was like, well, I mean, he'd probably be quoting from Paul, but
He'd probably go straight to the solution.
Yeah.
That's right.
He's like, this is my only hope.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, any closing thoughts for us? What would Dolly say?
Ooh, I don't know.
Go to Dollywood.
Yeah, no, go to Dollywood. No, I don't have any closing thoughts. I'm just glad to be here with y'all. And I mean, this is very awkward to do it in front of you. But I feel like it's gone okay. So I'm glad for that. Yeah.
Have we offended 50% of you? I hope. That was my goal.
I just feel like everybody who like had their parent have a funeral at a funeral home hates me now.
I know,
and
I
I'm
was
okay with
feeling
that.
the
I'm
same
just, I'm
thing.
going to receive it. So
I think there's forgiveness even for those who get the whole funeral thing wrong.
yeah.
I
Praise
mean, that's
God, yeah,
I'm
of
hoping
course.
open that because I've been to some disastrous ones.
Yeah.
Including that one I mentioned earlier. On that note, we'll stop holding you hostage and we'll get into the actual conference because we've got a yo-yoist that is about to knock your socks off. People think, did they just get a sort of a good yo-yoist to Mockingbird? And I say no.
That was last year.
We got the best yo-yoist we could find. This guy's been on the MTV Movie Awards. He's got a black light. You just don't know what you've signed up for. And I'm just so grateful for that. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks with Rutger.
Woo woo.
Amen.
Thanks, y'all.
Yay.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord.